Welcome to episode 310 of Sports Geek. On this week's CEO series episode, I chat with DS TECHEETAH's CEO Mark Preston about Formula E and the rise of motorsport.
Welcome to Sports Geek, the podcast built for sports digital and sports business professionals. And now, here's your host who looks forward to attending a game in your stadium, Sean Callanan.
Thanks, DJ Joel. Yes, I am looking forward to going to more games now that we're allowed in stadiums again. My name is Sean Callanan. You can find me on most places on the internet. I'm maybe a little bit not sharing as much as I used to, and that's something I'm trying to work on. But you can find me at Sean Callanan on most platforms, Twitter and Instagram, or Sean Callanan on LinkedIn. Otherwise, you can reach out to me the old-fashioned way. No, not by fax, but via email. Sean at sportsgeekhq.com will get me. Really happy to be back, trying to restart the podcast. Had a chat with Steve Mitchell earlier in the year to try to get things going. I caught up with Mark Preston for this podcast. A little bit stop-start. Apologies, but I am trying to get into a rhythm. I had a chat with Mark Preston, who is the CEO of the Formula E team, DS TECHEETAH, prior to the Melbourne Grand Prix. So I thought I'd record this after the Grand Prix, the very successful Australian Grand Prix, and congrats to all the people working at the Australian Grand Prix. Have had 2 years off, effectively, with no Grand Prix here in Australia. So congrats, especially to former or Sports Geek alumni, Arthur. Congrats on a really successful GP. Over 420,000 people went to the Grand Prix, so there was definitely a lot of appetite for Formula One. And as we discuss in this interview, I think Drive to Survive is one of the reasons why a lot of people turned up. And I'll talk about that both in the interview with Mark and afterwards. Before I get into that, don't forget, if you want some help, if you want to discuss an issue or a project or an approach or a platform, that's exactly what the Pick My Brain sessions are for. Simply go to sportsgeekhq.com/pickmybrain, and you can book in a 2-hour session. You can either do it with your whole team or just one-on-one. Happy to discuss the issues and sort of dive in on how I can help solve your problems. Thanks again to the supporters of our Patreon campaign. You can become a supporter by going to sportsgeekhq.com/Patreon. It helps us produce this content. But now let's get into my CEO series chat with the CEO of DS TECHEETAH Formula E team, Mark Preston. Very happy to welcome Mark Preston. He is the CEO of DS TECHEETAH Formula E team. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Good to join you this morning.
This morning, this evening, depending on which part of the world. We don't even know when the listener's listening to this, so good morning or good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. Yes, it is morning for you and evening for me. You're over in England. Here I am in Australia. First of all, let us, we're going to talk a bit of motorsport today, but how did you get your start? Normally I ask people how they get their start in the sports business, but I want to ask you, how did you get your start in motor racing?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So I was actually born in Geelong, so moved around Australia a bit and did my degree in engineering at Monash University. And during my degree, I decided I needed to learn a bit more practical things in sports. And so I found the only company that manufactured motor racing cars in Australia, which was Ball and Racing, just near Monash, where the university I went to. And so I went and offered my services. And during my time in doing my degree at Monash, I actually got started in motorsports.
And so was it a passion from when you were young? Were you on go-karts? Were you building cars? Were you tinkering with cars? Or was it something you came out of study and that engineering background?
So my grandfather was an auto wrecker in Geelong. And my uncle had a farm since we were young, and we lived on a farm in middle of New South Wales when we were in sort of grade 5. So we've always been around cars and trucks and fixing things. So yeah, came at it from that point of view, and that's part of the reason I did my mechanical degree at Monash.
And so working in different levels of motorsport? Like, where are some of the stops that you have to, because a lot of people, and we'll get to it later, talking about Drive to Survive, see the pinnacle of F1 and Formula E and the different classes, but it's not a matter of just knocking on the door and saying, "Hey, I want to work in this space." Is it very much you have to keep graduating rung upon rung in the motorsport game? What were some of the key early rungs for you?
So I did Formula Fords with Borland Racing in Australia. We had our own car. I think we did it for 7 years, and then at one point, a journalist actually said to me, "You need to go to F1, and before you're 27." So I was at Eastern Creek, and this journalist convinced me, Barry Lake who used to be one of the editors of one of the motorsport and motoring magazines, and he got a couple of the mechanics who traveled previously together and said, "Right, convince Mark that he needs to go to F1." So I was working for TWR HSV, which is now, Walkinshaw Motorsport, and they convinced me I should go to the UK. So I went for 2 weeks or 2 years. That was my plan. And then 25 years later, here I am still. So I got a job in F1 at Arrows Grand Prix at the time, which actually Tom Walkinshaw owned. He just purchased. So went to F1 there, worked my way up to running test teams and head of R&D and those kind of things. Sadly, they went down. So that's always the problem with sports, is obviously the economics always is a problem. I went off to McLaren, so I worked at McLaren for a few years. And then I decided to do something crazy, which was start my own Formula One team. And ended up doing that with Aguri Suzuki from Japan and Honda. So that was probably one of the most fun rides in motorsports, was starting a Formula One team in 100 days.
Yeah, I mean, like I have spoken to basketball leagues taken over in 100 days and rebuilding it when talking to the guys at the NBL, and I know from my own experience starting an esports team with in 3 months, but starting an F1 team in 100 days, like what does that list look like? Where do you start?
There's a big list. And first of all is how you got to convince people to join you. I remember that at the very beginning, we had to actually make sure people believed we were going to start. That was one of the problems. So we organized a night on a Sunday night, I think it was, in a pub in Whitney, which is a small town outside of Oxford. And we invited all the people we knew from F1 to make sure the word of mouth got out. So I think about 20 or 30 people came to that. And that meant that they communicated with most people in the sport to say, yeah, they're real. They seem like they're going forward. You should check out their job ads in the magazine that most people read in motorsports, which was Autosport magazine at the time. So that we first of all had to gain some credibility that we were real, and then people started applying for the jobs.
And so, I mean, you were coming up from a technical and design and a testing background. How much was like the business of F1, getting people on board, getting the money that's needed for all the pieces and the parts? Like, how much of a learning curve was that side of the business?
So that was, a lot of that was done by Aguri Suzuki. So he brought Honda, Bridgestone, Takuma Sato, the driver. An ex-colleague of mine, Daniel Odetto, was part of the startup as well, and he previously had been team manager of Ferrari and other teams in Formula One. So a lot of experience in the business side came from them. I got to apply that later myself when I started a Formula E team in the first years of Formula E, where I had to go off and find the money and find the people and start the whole thing. So I suppose if you look at my career, it's a progression of sort of, as you say, engineering, getting to understand that, being able to set up a team from an engineering point of view and running it operationally. And then in the more recent past, it's been also finding the money, getting the sponsors, understanding social media, understanding marketing and all that kind of thing. So lately I've been doing more of that side of the whole puzzle.
So, I mean, there's a bit of a jump there from when you were doing F1 and then there's sometimes some people are a glutton for punishment to a certain degree. Like you're not in it anymore, but you decided to get back in the game and be in that running a team. But this time in Formula E, for those who don't know, and maybe like a lot of us, watched Drive to Survive during the last 12 to 18 months and now enamored and following Formula One a lot closer than they once were. Where does Formula E sit and how is it different?
Yeah, I mean, so Formula E only started. We're in season 8 now, so we talk in seasons because we're so early on in the
Yep.
whole thing compared to F1. That's obviously been around for 50 or so years. I mean, lots of guys is probably longer than that. So very much starting from scratch. So like any sport that's starting from scratch, first of all, we need people to have awareness that it's there. So we're basically the electric form of open wheel, single seater racing. So we're the only sport that is fully electric. So that's our sort of claim to fame, I suppose you could say.
Yep.
So we race in similar ways. We race in Monaco now on the same circuit as F1. I can say that we have a lot more overtaking in Formula E than in Formula One, although the last weekend, which was quite good to watch in Saudi in Formula One, was quite exciting. So we've been going only for say 7 years, and fully electric, race around the world in cities, which is one of the bigger differences. So we race downtown. So we're in places like London. We actually go in and out of one of the big sports facilities down in Excel. So that's quite crazy, as you could imagine. We race outside the building, and then we go inside the building for the pit lane, which
Yep.
is quite crazy.
And so, like that initial, because we have seen a whole bunch of different leagues, whether they be, new versions of sports like cricket with shortened formed. How was the Formula E Championship formed? Was there a bidding process for you to say, hey, we're going to secure a spot? How was that inaugural season set up?
So Alejandro, who now runs the series, he and Jean Todt were sketching some ideas for electric motorsport, I think way back in 2012. And the FIA put out a tender to look at building all the cars and things like that. Funnily enough, I actually went for the tender to supply the cars because they'd come from that sort of side of things. Alejandro came along with the supply of the cars and the total package of being the promoter and every part of it. So he won that part of it, and then as soon as he sort of popped up, we said, "Can we have a team?" And he said, "Well, if you can bring Aguri Suzuki, bring a Japanese team, then you can join Formula E," which we did. So we brought again Aguri and I put together a team. We'd hoped to get Honda, but at the time Honda was obviously busy with F1. Looking into that. So we started the team in the first season and have changed ownership a few times over the period, but continued on and got better and better and won 5 of the 5 championships, 3 drivers and 2 teams. So it's been quite a successful sort of 7 years in Formula E.
Yes, that's terrific. And the thing is, when you're talking about that time, like that's 2012, 2013, and now, now fast forward 9 years or so, electric cars are becoming more prevalent from a commercial point of view. And has there been more interest and, I guess the innovations from Formula E to the commercial vehicles? And is there some byplay backwards and forwards there as there is interest being grown in electric cars overall?
I mean, in one of the presentations I give in 2009, if you remember, if you watch Top Gear, there was a crazy electric car they built, which was a joke, obviously, and it drove around Oxford at 5 miles an hour and caused all sorts of problems in the city. And if you fast forward to now, when there's so many different electric cars available, especially in Europe, it's crazy. At the very beginning, and I think this is probably true of anybody that's starting something new, people thought we were crazy. They really, really thought we were crazy. And it's really hard to describe now when it all seems so, normal that we're doing electric cars. But back in 2012, 2009, sort of that space, all the guys we knew in Formula One that we said we're going to go and do electric racing, they were like, "You're crazy. They won't even work. You won't be able to get around a lap. It's impossible." All those things. And now, we have exciting races in Monaco, quite amazing, good races. When Mexico, we're just about to go to Rome, so downtown in Rome. So it's come a long way, but it shows you how hard it is to start something from scratch. I think that's probably true of any sport, like when you started something in esports and esports itself, getting that to be credible. And obviously during COVID period, it really came to the fore, didn't it, in esports as well.
So has there been a couple of those pivot points of getting that first race away and making disbelievers of some of those doubters. But have there been certain parts, whether they be years or certain moments, that have made, oh yeah, we're actually onto something, and it sort of has that uptick? Have there been some significant moments in Formula E that have sort of illustrated that?
Yeah, so between the first car, sensibly, the FIA and Alejandro, they decided to have 2 cars per driver because at that time when we were looking at designing the Formula E cars, nobody had done it before, and so they had to play it safe. So for the first 4 years, each driver had 2 cars, so you had to swap in the middle. But the big change came when we went to 1 car. So in season 5, the new manufacturers came. BMW, Mercedes, Porsche, other teams started to join and give credibility. I think the fact that in Europe there was a big change in Europe to the rules just around electric cars in general, that's kicked off a huge amount more interest in electric cars. I suppose we've had the wind behind us, let's say. A rising tide floats all boats. As there's been so many things that have happened that have pushed Formula E. China's pushed electric cars. Obviously, a big push into renewables. Everything that's happening in the world is pushing further and further towards electric and renewables. And so I think all those elements have just kept pushing Formula E along. And so, as I say, some of the big things is other big manufacturers getting involved, bringing big cities on, having London race again now, being in downtown in Paris, New York, all those kind of things have pushed things. And I think just a general amount of interest in the sustainability and the eco side of things from all of the young people who have quite a young audience. So I think all of that element has pushed things dramatically.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the sustainability piece, because we're now seeing, stadiums taking sustainability, with a bit more credibility and actually trying to solve it. But then also, you're right, you've got now customers and fans asking sports, what is your sustainability plan? What is your impact on the planet? And I guess that's something that you've already got a green tick for effectively, but it's also a way to attract fans in some way to say, hey, this, if you want to follow motorsport, this is the one that is going to tick those boxes from the environment.
Yeah, one of the great things that Formula E's been doing is that we're the first sport to be net zero since inception. So, okay, we only started 7 years ago, but because they were, taking into consideration all of the logistics and everything we've been doing since the start and applying all the offsets and other things to the sport, it's great to be able to say that. We can say that we're the most efficient engines in the world. They're doing lots of things to do with single-use plastics and other things at races. The way we transport our cars around the world, we try to be the most eco as possible. So the cars, unlike other motorsports, just go on a journey around the world. They don't come back each time. And given that in sport, most of the CO2 does come from the people coming to the circuits or the logistics going to the races, you have to approach it from that point of view. Also, obviously, trying to work on everything to do with the renewable energy. So when we're downtown in a city, it's easier for us to have renewable energy. Funnily enough, when you race in the middle of a park, not many parks have 1 megawatt of electricity available to a park. So it's often quite difficult for Formula E to get electricity to a place. If we're racing in a place like London Excel, which is a big centre, obviously it has a lot of electricity because it's connected to the grid to run big events. So there's lots of things that we're doing around the world and working on for being more and more sustainable.
And does it the Excel is a really good example, but does it lend itself to being, because we're seeing more and more stadiums be built to be multi-purpose and have these precincts. So it really does lend itself to say a new stadium's getting built in this town. Oh, we can have a circuit around that's going to have, restaurants and bars and different viewing platforms already built into the architecture. Is there talks for Formula E to be sort of tapping those stadium developers on the shoulder to say, one, you've got the infrastructure there, but, we can really bring a great event to your stadium and to your precinct?
I mean, one of the best ones we had recently was in Mexico, and the Mexican fans are really crazy about motorsport. They really love motorsport. And there's a stadium where the cars go through what is normally a baseball stadium. So the cars come into the baseball stadium and do a little sort of an S in the stadium. And there's like 40,000 fans there, and they go absolutely crazy every time the cars come through that area. And the funny thing is, because Formula E cars, you're not deafened by the sound, you can hear the crowd every single time the cars go through that stadium. The crowd's going crazy, and so that element, I do agree. And when you have a look at what's happening at London Excel, it's quite amazing. I mean, when you just experience it, sadly, Antonio Felix da Costa, our driver, came into a bit of a fight with one of the Porsche drivers and hit the wall inside the stadium, inside the building. And so you can imagine when the car hit the concrete barrier, the whole place echoed. And there's actually fans in the stands inside the building. It's quite incredible, actually. And so to answer your question, I think it's a great idea, and I think it'd be great if we could go to other events, some of those big stadiums in the US and stuff. If you're able to go into a baseball stadium or a football stadium and do some small weaving through it and then go out the other side, I think that'd be really awesome.
Oh, well, stadium architects, whether it's Oakview or any of the other ones, please drop us a line if you want to have some Formula One cars zooming through your stadium. I think it's a great idea. I've touched on it a couple of times. Drive to Survive is this content documentary phenomenon. It is the roadmap. It is the shining example of how to do sports documentary / fan engagement development in a documentary series. And you talked about that rising tides lift all boats. Has it really just given a whole? I mean, it's done tremendous things for Formula One. We're recording this, and the Australian Grand Prix is going to be back a couple of years after it was cancelled. I've still got those tickets that I couldn't go to, but I'm going to be going back, in a short time. Has it had that same uplift for Formula E?
I mean, we've got a series that's on YouTube which you can look at. It's not quite as a grand scale as Drive to Survive, but I think the rising tide does lift, float all boats. And I think as more people get interested in Formula One, then they start to go and look at what else is out there. What else can I get? What else can I get interested in? I mean, you're right. I've seen people, as I'm on planes and things like that, watching Drive to Survive on their phones and stuff. And I think you don't look to me like a Formula One fan. Although I don't know what a Formula One fan should look like. But you can, when you ask people, do you ever been into it? They say, no, I'd never seen this side of motorsports. And so you can check out some of the things that Formula E has done. So it'll be really interesting to see as fans grow from this sport, from the Drive to Survive type things. I haven't watched the latest one yet myself. But
no spoilers for anyone listening. I mean, the funny thing is, it's got so successful. I was actually talking to friends the other day, with the new season starting. They're like, "Oh no, I'm not watching. I don't want to spoil Drive to Survive." Like that's almost too successful. Like I don't want to I want to wait to watch the drama. So like that's almost going too far. No, we want you to consume the sport, please.
Yes.
but that's how successful it has been, and it does show how can you make your drivers more engaging to fans, more connected with fans. Are there things that you do with your drivers at DS TECHEETAH to try to make them heroes, make them stories you want to follow, have the fans be invested? That's what Drive to Survive has done with the different drivers that are out there. What are some of the things that have worked for you to get some of your drivers better connected to your fans?
I think actually Formula E has been a bit of an experimental place where the FIA, which organises motorsport, has been able to experiment because, Formula E had to start from scratch, obviously, as a new sport. So from the very beginning, the drivers and the teams were allowed to film more stuff in pit lane, in the garages, etc., which F1 has obviously just started to do recently and has had a big impact. So I think actually Formula E was able to experiment and allow some experimentation with that. We've got something called Fan Boost, which is the fans vote for their favorite driver, and the top 5 get Fan Boost, which gives them extra power during the race.
So
that is a
effectively,
good way
to explain that, and for those who are of our vintage who would remember, Michael Knight's Knight Rider, and he effectively hit the turbo boost. That's effectively what the fan boost is, isn't it? It's like
Yes.
the NBA All Star voting or voting for the Pro Bowl. The fan votes come in, and effectively you're one of the drivers, and it might be one of yours if you've got a popular driver. He effectively has a button that it's like a 5-second increase in power.
Yeah.
Is that if I got
Yeah,
that right?
that's correct. And our drivers have used it to success in a few places. And if you want to watch an exciting race, do watch the Monaco race where Antonio wins and does use the fan boost to overtake one of the drivers, Mitch Evans from New Zealand. So that's quite an exciting race to watch if you want to check out Formula E and see how much fun it is to watch.
I could update that reference with, I could have just talked about the Fast and Furious franchise and,
Yes.
Dom using nitrox, but no, I wanted to go with the turbo boost of Knight Rider. But like it is one of the first, because there is this, there's a lot of people saying, a lot of talk of how do we get fans better involved and invested in, but that, it's one of the only ones, that actually can affect the result. Was there any concerns, sometimes those kinds of, was there any concerns around competitive integrity for those kind of things from a race point of view? Or, because it's a terrific way to engage your fans.
I think we've got a good balance of the sporting nature of it. I think, some people could say that it's not traditional, but then again, nothing is traditional. A lot of people say, we should go back to how everything was in the old days, but I don't think that's the case. Cars in motor racing, cars have got a lot more reliable nowadays, and therefore they don't break down all the time, which means that most people finish the race.
Pretty consistent, and everyone's running at the same speed. Yep.
Yeah, you do need some elements, I believe, to make it more interesting. And I think you're about to ask us, the other one we have is attack mode.
Yeah, attack mode. Tell me about attack mode.
So the drivers,
because I've got visions of guns coming out, Luke Skywalker style, but I know that's not it. But that's when you said it to me, I'm like, really? That'd be terrific. But obviously that is not it. So please explain attack mode.
I think the simplest way to explain it is that it's like a very short pit stop, but really what you do is you go offline and you have to go through these two lines and trigger something inside the car, which allows you to then have extra power for 4 minutes. So you lose about 1.5 to 2 seconds by having to go offline to get the power. And then the top of the roll hoop has a different color, goes pink, I think it is. So that then the other drivers know you've got attack mode, so you've got more power. You actually do have a reasonable amount of power. You can go about 0.7 seconds quicker. So you can see you lose 1.5 to 2 seconds, and then you go about sort of 7/10 quicker. And then over those 4 or 5 laps that you get the power for, you've got to then overtake. But to decide when to take it is quite difficult, because it's so
it becomes as much strategy than just straight advantage. It's not just like you're out in front, so you're the first one to claim it, so you go further out in front. It's something that it's So what I will like, it's more like Mario. You're picking up the coin, and it's giving you a special skill. So it does sort of bring in, which Formula E does, that gaming element, and leaning into people who are playing games, whether they're playing the racing sims and those kind of things. It's adding some of that gamification to the traditional race.
Exactly. It's quite fun to watch as well. It keeps it exciting, because if you got 2 guys at the front and one guy's only sort of 5/10 ahead of the one behind, he's going to lose 1.5 seconds when he goes to get the extra power, but he has to do it during the race. So therefore, it makes it a bit difficult for the first person in front.
Well, and that's part of the joy of that motorsport, of that cat and mouse, when you're going to overtake and to give someone else an advantage or have them try to get it. It gives you some options. So one of the things you did say there that you started on the effectively the tech side and the mechanic side of things. Then you're in the role of team principal, which is effectively, correct me if I'm wrong, but head mechanic and effectively running everything. So effectively the coach of a motorsport team. But now moving to from a CEO point of view, And I've spoken to CEOs that have come from the business side of the sport and made their spot, and then they've come from the the football or the basketball or the coaching and the high performance side. Have you worked on getting that balance right, like not putting your hat back on and getting back on the tools and tinkering with the car, which is that if that's your skill set, you're like, oh, that's what I want to do, but now you'll have a team principal and people who are driving that. Have you learned about delegation being in the CEO role?
Yeah, I think that's one thing I am quite good at is delegating. Even at my barbecue at my house, my wife always comes out and says, "How are you not cooking the barbecue?" So, well, I delegated that to other people so that I can go and get drinks for people. So it's that kind of example where, as you say, if you get good at delegating and trying to have specialism. So what I find is that in at least in motorsport, a lot of success comes from having somebody who does their job the best. So the person who looks after the travel, they're the best person in the world to do travel for us. And that's their job, and they make sure they do that really well. The same to the person who bolts the front wheels on. I'm not so good at that. And I probably did that when I was 20 years old, but I don't have any skills in that area anymore. So all I can do is ask hard questions. So I think I go around and ask people, so why has that gone wrong? Or why did we get into this position? How can we fix it? What do we need to do? And sort of maybe sometimes saying, but we have got the money to fix that problem. Why did you not realize that we had those resources? Okay, I didn't realize that I hadn't communicated that properly to say that we do have the resources for that, that problem or that thing. And then more and more involved in the future of the sport and trying to make sure that I understand what sponsors are looking for. Working with my commercial director on how we can, give better value to the sponsors that support us and the partners that support us. So it's become a lot more about business side. As you say, delegation, I think, is probably one of the most important things. And having people that are specialists at their job and supporting them in what they're great at. And that's really, for me, part of the success.
And so on the business side, and it's something that you sort of, you put your hand up and said that's something that you've learned since, moving into that role. Motorsport has, had a history of, logos on a lot of things, like on the driver, on the helmet, on the car. Has, and it still happens now across motorsport, but has that appetite for, logos on things and what sponsors are looking for from motorsport changed, evolved in the past, 10 or 15 years?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in Formula E, one of the reasons I did look at Formula E was I wanted to see how to keep motorsport relevant to the future. And certainly electric racing is very, very relevant to the future of cities. And that's one of the things. So we race in cities. Cities are the most likely place that electric vehicles become successful just because of the way they work and the way I can get into the deep things about energy and all those kind of things. But you can imagine a lot of the sponsors want to be involved in learn about electric vehicles, learn about what makes them successful, have stories to tell customers. So, we work with DS Automobiles, obviously, telling customers how the race cars work and how that's similar to road cars, educating people. So the partners want to have stories about how electric vehicles work, how they're learning, how they're helping us to learn about how the vehicles work, because this is new to everybody. 10, 15 years ago, there wasn't that much knowledge in the world about electric racing cars or even electric road cars. And so there's a lot of learning going on. The car companies are learning, the charging companies are learning, partners like Total Energies who are getting more and more into charging vehicles, renewable energy, and understanding how it all works together. It's certainly super important to the partners in sport.
And I guess back to that sustainability piece, you've got a lot of partners that are trying to, so the sponsorship piece becomes that corporate social responsibility piece to say, oh, we're involved with Formula E because it is green, it is sustainable, and that's part of our values. So it does become a really important feature that you can offer from a sponsorship package point of view.
Yeah, definitely. So just being involved in it and living it and breathing it every day and pushing towards more and more sustainable angles. There's still things we need to do. but everybody's working hard to make the sport as sustainable as possible. At least at the moment, it's obviously net zero, but you want to go further than just net zero. There's so many things we can all do, and it helps to educate people, and also, the followers of the sport have something to point towards when they're telling their friends, you should be more involved in renewable elements, sustainable elements. I think it's a good story for the fans to tell as well.
And you're still talking about single-digit seasons. Like, it's still a really young motorsport. And you're looking at this, a long-term view of where it could go. Like, similar to me in an esports league that just restarted. So we're in year 2, and it's been in Australia for 8 years. So, what is your long-term one? Where is your long-term view, and where are you looking? Are you looking to is 2 years? Especially coming out of the last 2 years, which no one could have predicted. But where is your lens? Are you looking 2 years away, 5 years away, 10 years away on where Formula E could be?
So I suppose, coming from a technical background, I suppose I'm always a bit focused on the technical side of things. There is a new generation of car that's coming next season, which is a big jump in power and capability. That's going to last for 4 years, and then we have to start thinking about sort of 5 years in advance. What is an electric car 5 years into the future, 10 years into the future going to need to look like? What's going to be important? That's quite difficult to figure out at the moment. In fact, so we have a lot of discussions between the teams and the manufacturers and cities and other people as to what is the mobility of the future going to be. So we do have to think that far out in order to understand what we believe is going to be the future. Hopefully, given that we're probably a little bit early with Formula E, I imagine, starting way back in 2009, 10, 11, 12. A few people have said recently we were probably a little bit too early. But I suppose that's the good thing, is now we have to think sort of 5, 10 years in advance. What do we think the future is going to be about? I think it's going to be, given the situation in the world at the moment, and energy is going to be even more important than it was already. I think there's going to be more and more push towards renewable energy. How renewable can everything be, and how sustainable can things be, and resilience and all those elements. So I think supply chains, all those elements are going to be hugely important, and this is where Formula E can lead the way.
So that's you putting on your technical hat of what are the cars going to look like, how are they going to sound, and what's the impact of them going to be? What's the fan experience and the sport going to look like in 5 to 10 years with a potential new version of a car or another version of a car? But what does Formula E want from a fan experience? I mean, you already talked about it, in that city-based, around city grids, and someone's already ringing you up now to say, hey, I've got a new stadium, I want you to bring a Formula E event. So we're already going to get that happening. But what do you think the fan experience and the event that is Formula E going to look like in 5 to 10 years?
I think from my point of view, I remember in Monaco one year when we had one of our partners came and experienced Formula One with us, actually, in the garage. I think the closer fans can get to the excitement, and the more they understand the decisions and the stress levels, I think, the more someone can understand how stressed we are, how the drivers, state of mind as they enter the last race of the series to try and win the series, the more they can get in the head of the team and understand what's going on, so they feel the stress and excitement of what's happening, and the closer they can get to the action is the most important thing. So I suppose as technology develops, and the closer fans can get to the car, to be more on board, to link that to what's happening in esports, to get a real feel and a buzz about how difficult it is to drive the cars, how exciting it is to drive the cars. All those elements, I think, are important. And keeping it exciting, the Drive to Survives are obviously really important, because that brings the fans closer to what's happening behind the scenes. I think that's, really super important. So just experience, I suppose at the end of the day, if you can get a fan to experience it as potentially I do or someone else in our team, that's almost as close as you can get. I think to living the same stress levels and excitements and ups and highs and lows and all of those kind of things. So for me, still, in some ways, you could say nothing's changed in sport. I think it's how do you create excitement, make sure it's exciting to watch, make sure people feel the danger, the excitement, and those elements. And the better we can do that, the better I think it'll be for fans to watch our sport.
Well, I think you're right. I think the drive to survive will keep growing the audience, and the audience will want more content, and so people will consume F1, and then they'll go, well, I want more content, and Formula E offers that. I think the other piece, which we haven't really touched on, from a gaming setup point of view, it's such an easy, like you said, how to feel like you're in the car. The gaming tech, whether it be gaming rigs or even driving setups with different, with consoles and PCs, are getting closer and closer to feeling like it is. Like motorsport is one of the first sports I think that will actually have some viable, tangible success, in the metaverse and this VR space of, oh no, you're watching the race, but you could effectively put on a helmet and feel like you're the driver, and get that feeling, right? And actually be closer than at the moment. It's a camera over your shoulder in pit lane, but it's like, well, hang on. It's only a few sensors to be put onto the helmet, and the car's got all the other sensors. It knows. And so whether it's a haptic suit that is, giving you some reaction and those kind of things, like that might be something, it sounds gimmicky and like now, but, to people who have grown up playing games and trying these and trying to make those games feel as real life as possible, that might be a way, that they consume. And there might be, sports rights and digital rights of motorsport that get carved up to be, there may be, and we still probably, we still haven't seen a Web3 company that says we're going to go all in on VR sports production in motorsport and like scoop up the rights. And like I said before, with Formula E, it's a really good petri dish for motorsport. Like it's, it would be a large undertaking to do that in an F1 sense, but it's like, how could that be done? So, when people say, VR is a tough one, it's one that's sitting right there for motorsport for mine.
Yeah, I think great thing about Formula E is that we can still experiment because we're still new, even though we're sort of 8 seasons in. We're still new, and as you say, it's harder for F1 to experiment because they've been around for so long, and it's very difficult for them to try new things. But we can definitely try new things in Formula E and experiment, and that's one thing where Alejandro is very, very good at trying things and experimenting with things. And he's got things like Extreme E, and there's all sorts of other exciting new sports coming. And I think we can keep experimenting and trying to make it a really exciting experience for the fans.
Yeah, the one thing, I do get it, Caitlin, in esports, you're not getting people saying, oh, we never did that in Formula E. It's like, no, guys, it's year 8. It's, we get to keep changing and evolving. Yes, motorsport has a large and vast history, but, Formula E is still being invented. And we're seeing,
One of the great things in Formula E, actually, funnily enough, just you reminded me in the beginning, we've got people from different motorsports. So myself coming from Formula One, we've got Andretti who's from IndyCar. We've had Apt in the series who are from DTM. We've had some of the guys from EDAMS were from Formula 2 and other elements. And so having quite a broad pool of people from different motorsports, it was really good at the beginning to say, that didn't work in DTM because of these reasons. However, we did this, and it might work well in this series if we put that together with what happened in IndyCar. And so it was great, and still is, when we can say, let's try this, let's experiment, let's see how it goes. And we'll fix it if it's got a problem. But so far, for example, in this season, we've done a different qualifying format, a duels knockout type format. And there's some little tweaks that have to be done, and all the teams are agreeing on what those tweaks will be. But all in all, it's been I think a really positive change, and created some more interesting stories for the fans to watch.
as someone that goes to teams meetings myself with everyone in the team trying to build the league, how are those teams meetings? Because it's, when you're on the track, you're all racing against one another, but when but you also want the greater good for this sport. How have those, all the voices being heard and trying not to, one-upmanship, for mine, I think they're the kind of things that a lot of people don't realise is happening in the world of sport. Those team meetings and league meetings that happen, some are more collegial than others. How is it in Formula E?
I mean, at the very beginning, it was. I'll say what it was like at the very beginning, and
Yep.
it's changing slightly. But at the very beginning, let's say everyone knew I was from a technical background, and the boss of Andretti was also from a technical background. The guy that was the boss of Virgin was from a commercial background, and
Yep.
so at the beginning, I would say, well, the person who's from a commercial background should probably.
Yep.
Put more credence in their answer about a commercial question. And if there was a technical question, then they would look to me and my colleague at Andretti and say, "What do you guys think from a technical point of view?" So at the very beginning of Formula E, it's what allowed us to mold the sport quite quickly.
Yep.
Obviously, as time goes on, there's more bigger and bigger players that have got more and more invested in the series. So it has got a bit harder to do that. It's still pretty good in Formula E. There's still a fair amount of camaraderie and trying to make sure that we keep it exciting and keep it growing. But you can definitely tell that it's not quite the same as it was at the beginning, but still pretty good. Still pretty good.
No, that's good. I mean, and again, some of the most successful leagues in the world are that because they can get the teams. That's the thing. Again, it is tougher maybe for you being in the technical space, but if you're selling tickets or jerseys for one team, you're not competing with the other team. You want everyone to be, you want more TV rights, you want more league partners, you want more cities bidding. So it's and I always come from the business side, let's get that piece right. And then when we're fighting one another, or we're playing one another, or racing against one another, go your hardest. It's sort of
exactly.
that's the beauty of sport, but getting that right is always tough at times.
Indeed.
Mark, I do appreciate it catching up and responding to my email. We have been bouncing backwards and forwards, and hopefully you get back to Australia sometime. I'm assuming you haven't been back in a couple of years because of restrictions.
Yes.
I wanted to finish off with the Sports Geek closing five. You are from Melbourne. Geelong is just down the road from where I am here. Do you remember the first sports event you ever attended?
Well, I have to say the first big sports event was actually F1 in Adelaide. I think if you're talking really big, so that's probably one of the biggest ones. When I was at university, I had to pay for myself to drive over to watch that. So I think that's one of the big sports events I went to.
And yes, and hello to the still bitter people in South Australia because Melbourne stole the Grand Prix, and hopefully we hold on to it. It's been a tough couple of years, but hopefully we do hold on to it. It's going to happen. We're recording this a week before it's going to happen, and from all reports, it's completely sold out. So I think it will be, an absolutely terrible success. Yeah, terrific success is the word I'm looking for. Terrific success.
Yeah, I'm sure it will.
You would have been at many sports events and many motorsports events. Did you have a favourite food at a sports event or a go-to food when you're at a sports event?
Of course, pie and sauce. I mean, when I go back to Australia, I always have to go and have a pie and sauce when I arrive. Find 4 and 20 somewhere. So yeah, that's pretty easy.
Yes, they round one this year. This year in the AFL, it was like $2 pie and sauce, 1980s prices, I think. But yes. You're sort of a bit the same. I just can't go past, and I'll just have a sneaky pie. What's the first app you open in the morning?
Actually, the first one is LinkedIn. Actually, because I'm more and more focused on the B2B element of motorsports and being in the business side of things, I do read a lot of stuff in LinkedIn. And then sort of Apple News, Financial Times, just to keep up with what's happening in the world and more about what's happening in the business side of the world.
Okay. And is the business side of motorsport active on LinkedIn?
Yeah, there's a lot going on in LinkedIn and certainly a lot of our partners, a lot of B2B partners in Formula E because it's all about the growing infrastructure and the things growing around the EV ecosystem. So LinkedIn's are really, really important to us.
Terrific. Is there someone that you follow, and you might be someone that you follow on LinkedIn or an author or something that you think the podcast listeners should check out, and why?
Funny enough, I suppose I listen to a lot of podcasts. So I do a lot of walking, and when I'm at the racetrack, then I walk in as much as I can. That's a good thing about Formula E. We're in cities, so I try to walk into the racetrack. I often go and look for podcasts in the next thing I'm trying to understand. So if I'm trying to understand about how renewable energy works, I go and download 5 podcasts in renewable energy. Or if I want to know a little bit, funny enough, your podcast, when I wanted to learn a bit more about social media or get a different angle on sports, I listen to the Sports Geek podcast so that I get something from a different sports, because you do obviously a lot of things from different sports. So that's the angle I sort of approach it from. When I want to learn something, I go off and learn. I immerse myself in learning things, and maybe I also then go over to YouTube and watch a whole lot of little videos about that thing just to learn. So I'm a big fan of learning, I think.
But the beauty of podcasts, and long-time advocate, is it goes far deeper. Like YouTube is great, and I've got all these recommendations for all the things that I'm now cooking, because it's good. It's like, get it. It's a 7-minute video, but I don't listen to any cooking podcasts because I don't have a deep dive or desire to go deep on it. But where podcasts is good, you can pick a topic and go, I want to go deep. Whether it is the metaverse or whether it's cryptocurrency or whether it's digital or whether it's, like you said, renewables or sustainability, it enables you to sort of dive in, or looking at different types of content, whether they be, sports audio documentaries, and you get your mind thinking, well, how can we do, Steal with Pride? How can we do something like that? Lastly, you might have already spoiled the result, but that's okay. There's no spoil. What social media platform is your MVP, and potentially also look at what is the platform of choice to connect with DS TECHEETAH fans?
Yes, myself personally at LinkedIn, I think I gave it away from the point of view. Myself, I think that our drivers, they focus on Twitter, Instagram. I think looking more and more at TikTok, but Instagram certainly a big element. Doing short videos and those kind of things. On those two platforms, I think the drivers are more the personal side of things, where I sort of look at it from the more business side of things. So I've grown a reasonably large audience on LinkedIn, and as I say, that's where I can find many of the people I need to talk to. So I focus on that side of things. The team itself goes across different platforms. So I think each layer does something different. So myself, I'm more at thought leadership, that kind of element, and maybe about the future of the sport and those kind of things. The drivers about the fun stuff that's going on in the weekend and their lives, and how they lead up and get ready for races. And then the team also what's happening in the races, reporting more about what's going on in around the sport and those kind of things, and just providing some sort of background on the team and what's happening. So that sort of layers of interaction. And then actually some of our partners running different things, like Marley does stuff with esports, and some of our other partners like Total and others join in and support some of the elements of the total thing.
Terrific. What is the best place on the internet for people to reach out to you, and if they want to say, hey, Mark, I listened to the podcast, enjoyed it?
I think LinkedIn's easiest. So just find me, Mark Preston, on LinkedIn. There, just look for DS TECHEETAH and you'll find me. Yes,
Mark Preston, you've secured your URL. It's still surprising that a lot of people have not set up their vanity URL. So linkedin.com/in/Mark Preston, and you'll find Mark. Yeah. And where can people? Where can I send the podcast listeners to give DS TECHEETAH a fan boost? Where's the best place for them to do it?
Just go onto our Twitter feed, so DS TECHEETAH on the Twitter feed, and also on Instagram. You'll find us there.
All right. Well, I'll be putting in my fan boost vote for the next race, and hopefully see that enabled. But appreciate you coming on. Look forward to doing more podcasts this year as you get back into the swing of it. And hopefully we'll see you in this part of the world soon.
Cool. Thanks, Sean.
Why not book a Pick My Brain session with Sean Callanan? Go to sportsgeekhq.com/pickmybrain.
Thanks again to Mark Preston. Send him a tweet, Mark Preston3 on Twitter, or reach out to him on LinkedIn, Mark Preston. Connect. Tell him that you listen to the podcast. Tell him what you liked, and hopefully catch a Formula E race in your part of the world. So, yeah, again, thanks to Mark. Another thing, before I jump into a bit of discussion around things, office hours are still open. They are offering them on a weekly basis. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/office hours. The idea is they're there for people who are looking to make a change careers. There's been a lot of flux in the last 2 years, and you might be trying to figure out how to reposition yourself or find yourself in a different sport. Happy to have a chat, especially if you're a podcast listener. I really do appreciate the support with both listenership and reviews across iTunes and all other platforms. So you can go to sportsgeekhq.com/office hours if you would like a little bit of help and have a bit of a chat. Want to tackle digital dollars a different way this week and figure out how it can work for you and your team. It's really built around your objective, driving dollars from digital. Is it fan growth? Is it digital engagement? Is it deliver for sponsors? How do you increase revenue from digital? That's exactly what it's designed for. And what I wanted to do is to explain the digital dollars process with the phenomenon. And look at that, I nailed phenomenon on the first go. With the phenomenon that is Drive to Survive. So if you haven't watched Drive to Survive yet, I highly recommend it. I've binged my way through all seasons and then went to the Grand Prix knowing who all the drivers were and knowing all the cars going around. It's been a terrific fan growth facilitator for Formula One. So I want to describe it from a digital dollars process. So first pillar is know your audience. And so in this case, Drive to Survive, at least in my outsider looking in, Drive to Survive was targeted to a non-motorsport, non-F1 sport audience. They wanted to attract a younger audience. They wanted to attract an audience that watches reality TV, that wants real life, and that watches these growing genre of documentaries. So that's the first point, like targeting a new audience. Yes, the Formula One fans love it and consume it voraciously, but the premise and the target audience that you want, that was driven for it, was to attract that new audience. And so that gives a really strong focus for the actual content that gets delivered. So, which brings you to know your content, right? So how do we go about targeting that younger audience that's a bit disconnected with sport or doesn't even know the sport exists? They just went about making one of the best sports documentaries and storytelling and really focused on the drivers and the personalities. And that was their content piece. That's what the Drive to Survive series is in its entirety. And so the fact that there was huge growth, using the Australian Grand Prix as an example, lucky enough to hear from Andrew Resticott at Sport Next, and I'll talk about Sport Next in a little bit. The growth in female ticket buying and went up from 25% to 40%. That can clearly be attributed to Drive to Survive. Whether they decided to watch Drive to Survive themselves and was recommended, or whether they watched it with their partner, it sort of doesn't matter. They started watching it and got hooked and have now become F1 fans as a result. So that's a real, tick the box for both attracting a new audience and the quality of the content that is produced. Now, the distribution for Drive to Survive is quite unique. Normally, when I'm talking about distribution, I'm talking about your own channels, email, your website, or channels that you're building and earning, like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all the social media channels. But in this case, the distribution is actually Netflix. But the second piece that I think is just as powerful, even though Netflix is an amazing distribution platform that has an amazing algorithm, and it keeps tweaking it to making sure that you're seeing things that you should see, whether it's things that your friends see. They've even brought in the double like. So now if you double like things, it's obviously going to give them more information to the algorithm what they should be showing you, which helps them understand what they should also be developing. But I think the other thing of distribution is, and part of the success of Drive to Survive has been the word of mouth. I know for myself, I don't have a lot of F1 and motorsport fans. And literally over 3 or 4 months, and again, it was lockdown induced. A lot of people found a lot of different content over lockdown. I had 4 or 5 friends that are not connected tell me, oh, you've got to watch Drive to Survive. It's really good. And they weren't F1 fans. So I think that word of mouth piece from a distribution point of view can't be underestimated. So that's the first 3 pillars of digital to dollars process: audience, content, and distribution. The last 2 pieces are more in the branded content piece from a rights holder side. And so normally it's value. You know, the next pillar is know your value, and what is the value to F1 teams from Drive to Survive. Now, they're not selling spots inside Drive to Survive, but you are seeing all their sponsors, all their drivers covered in all of their logos. You're seeing the livery of the cars and everything like that. So there is no doubt the amazing viewership from Drive to Survive is being included, and as almost a nice as a bonus to all the sponsors that are party to F1. So each year on year, a big portion of audience and attribution will be going to Drive to Survive, as it's increasing eyeballs for the sponsors and the drivers. Right, you've also got to remember that that the teams and the drivers are getting more social following through this. So it's not a traditional, like normally know your value is trying to price out the different assets that you are presenting to your partner to explain to them what value you're delivering. In this case, I've flipped it a little bit to show, you're effectively showing the value of a media partner that's producing great content that your team is based in. So it still gives great value to your commercial partners. And then the last one is the pitch. And so the figures being bandied about that Netflix is spending $1 million an episode in producing Drive to Survive. Is it worth it? And it's the answer is absolutely. TV ratings are up, attendance is up. Currently, I think I was reading in Sports Business Journal, the US TV rights for F1 are up. Currently, they're $5 million a year, and F1 is pushing for $75 million a year. Now, that is a massive jump. Now, whether they get it or not is another thing, but the fact that they've now got 3 races in the US and they're growing interest in the US, there is real potential for, growing revenue. So for, $10 to $15 million each year to produce the series, it's paying for itself with increased attendance and TV. So it's a really good way to, reverse pitch to say, hey, why should we do it? This is what the costs are going to be. This is how we're going to go about doing it. But having that foundation of knowing the audience you're going to tackle, knowing the type of content you're going to produce, and knowing how you're going to distribute it are really key when you go back to that pitch. Now, that pitch could be going to a sponsor, or it could just be going to your board when you're trying to pitch a particular content series or a particular activation. You still got to go through that process and have that foundation of who's the audience you're going to engage, what type of content, what are you going to style it on, who are you going to be inspired by, steal with pride, as I'd say, to develop it. Now, there is a lot of Drive to Survive clones that are not having the same success. Now, is it the levers of going for the right audience or making sure the content is up to enough quality, or is it production value and the like, and trying to figure out how you can do something to the level without the budgets of $1 million an episode? So if you'd like to tackle some of your content initiatives or some of your digital initiatives through the digital dollars process and figure out how you can better commercialize them with your partners, please give us a call. You can go to digital-to-dollars.com to check out that. The first 3 pillars, audience, content, distribution, pretty much set you up for your digital strategy. Then the last two are around that commercialization process of what's the value and how do you go about pitching that back to your sponsors. So please reach out, Sean at sportsgeekhq.com. I love working with different partners to figure out those three pillars and then figure out what that commercialization picture looks like. The other thing I wanted to quickly mention, it was really great, again, just before the Grand Prix, to attend a conference in person. We haven't had many conferences in person here in Australia. So I attended Sport NXT. It was over 2 days at Centrepiece, the new function centre at Melbourne Olympic Park, which is a terrific venue, which was used for hospitality around the recent Australian Open. But it was great. Content, good content, but mainly for me, it was great that networking was back. So it was great to see many Sports Geek podcast alumni in attendance and connect with different people. And hopefully, I think it is one of the reasons I haven't done a lot of podcasts recently is I haven't caught up with people in a setting like a conference to find out what cool things they're doing and what stories I can bring to you as an audience. So the good thing is I did catch up with a lot of people and I'm in the interview booking process to get people on board. If you're listening to this and I did talk to you about booking in that interview, I actually do want that interview booked in, so please get in touch. That's it for me. Looking forward to attending more conferences in 2022 and hopefully talking and meeting you at those conferences. If not, don't forget you can reach out to me, book in a phone call. Let's have a chat about how I can help you. sportsgeekhq.com/phone call. Or you can just go straight away and pick a 2-hour Pick My Brain by going to sportsgeekhq.com/pick my brain. That's it from me. Until next episode, my name is Sean Callanan, and you've been listening to Sports Geek.
Do you have a gaming and esports strategy? Let us share what we've learned. Book in for a call, sportsgeekhq.com/phone call. Want to develop your athletes? Contact Sean about our digital education program built for athletes to help them grow their brand and presence across digital and social media. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/social media athlete training. For more resources, go to sportsgeekhq.com.